Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The secrets of the old library. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like something was watching you? Not the kind of feeling where someone's eyes follow your every move, but the creeping sensation that the very walls and objects around you are alive with something sinister? It all started when I found an old library tucked away in the corner of town. I had lived in this area my whole life and never noticed it before. The building was ancient, almost crumbling, with ivy creeping up its stone walls. Its large wooden doors were weathered, and the windows were caked with years of dust and grime. Most people in town didn't even know it was there or had long forgotten about it, but I stumbled upon it one rainy afternoon while out for a walk. Something about its eerie, forgotten presence called to me, urging me to go inside. The door creaked as I pushed it open, a low groan that seemed to echo in the empty air. Inside, the musty smell of old paper and wood hit me immediately. Rows and rows of books lined the tall shelves, and the light barely made it past the grimy windows. The air felt thick, like the room had been sealed shut for years. I remember thinking to myself, how has this place been left so untouched? But as I wandered through the shelves, the sense of something being off settled deep in my bones. There was a strange weight in the air, almost as if I was being watched. My skin prickled, and every so often, I thought I heard a faint rustling sound, like the whisper of paper turning itself. I tried to shake it off as my imagination running wild. After all, I was alone in this forgotten place, surrounded by books that hadn't been read in decades. I spent hours browsing the shelves. Most of the books were old and weathered, their spines cracked and titles faded. Many of them were in languages I didn't recognize, filled with strange symbols and diagrams. As much as I tried to read them, I couldn't make sense of what they were about. It wasn't until I found a book tucked away in the far corner of the library that things began to feel wrong. It was different from the others, much older and covered in a layer of dust so thick that it looked like it had been forgotten for centuries. The cover was bound in a dark, worn leather, and it had no title, just a strange symbol etched into the surface, a circular shape with what looked like intertwined serpents. I pulled the book off the shelf, and as soon as my fingers touched the cover, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the cold that comes from a draft or a breeze, but something more profound, something that seemed to come from the very pages of the book itself. My instincts told me to leave it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. After all, it was just a book, right? I opened it. The pages were filled with strange, twisted letters and symbols that I couldn't decipher. They spiraled across the pages like some kind of maddening script, and as I flipped through, I noticed the writing changed directions, becoming more chaotic the deeper I went into the book. Something about it felt alive. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier. The light filtering through the windows dimmed, and the sound of the rain outside faded into a distant hum. I looked up, realizing that I could no longer hear anything outside the library. It was as if the world beyond had vanished, leaving me alone with this book in a place that felt increasingly like a tomb. My hands trembled as I flipped to the last few pages. That's when I noticed something strange. The ink on the pages began to shift. The symbols, the words, they weren't staying still. They were moving, rearranging themselves. I slammed the book shut, my heart racing. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts, and I felt a tightness in my chest, like something unseen was pressing down on me. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just a trick of the mind, some kind of optical illusion from the dim light. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. I shoved the book back on the shelf, eager to leave the library. But as I turned to leave, the room seemed different. The aisles were longer, the shadows deeper, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. I hurried to the entrance, but the door I had entered through now seemed farther away than before. The walls of books seemed to close in, the shelves towering over me like dark sentinels. The creaking of the door as I pushed it open was a relief. Fresh air hit my face, but something was wrong. It wasn't raining anymore. The sky was clear, the sun setting in the distance, casting a red glow across the landscape. I looked at my watch. Hours had passed since I first stepped inside, but it didn't feel like that long. Time had slipped away from me in there, and I had no idea how. I tried to push the experience out of my mind, but the memory of that book, with its twisting, moving words, stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the library had shown me something I wasn't supposed to see. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the strange symbol on the cover of the book, and those moving words haunted my dreams. It was like the book had imprinted itself on my mind, and no matter what I did, I couldn't forget it. A week later, I found myself standing in front of the library again. I had tried to stay away, but something kept drawing me back. It was like a pull, a magnetic force that I couldn't resist. As much as I tried to forget, I knew I had to go back inside. I stepped through the door once more, and this time, the library felt different. The air was colder, heavier. I made my way through the aisles, my eyes scanning the shelves for the book I had found before. But it wasn't there. The shelf where I had placed it was empty. A sense of dread settled over me as I continued searching, but the book was gone. It was as if it had never existed. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Another book, resting on a nearby shelf. It looked similar to the first, with that same dark, leather cover. I hesitated, my heart racing, but my curiosity got the better of me again. I pulled the book from the shelf and opened it. The words were the same, twisted and spiraling across the pages. But this time, there was something new, a name. My name. I stood there, frozen, staring at the pages. My name, clear as day, was written over and over, tangled between those strange symbols and spiraling letters. Each time I blinked, the letters seemed to shift and pulse, like they were alive, like they were watching me. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and it was suddenly hard to breathe. How could my name be in this book? I hadn't written it. I hadn't even touched this particular book before. Panic surged through me, and for a split second, I considered throwing the book down and running out of the library, but my hands wouldn't let go. Instead, I kept turning the pages, each one containing more and more of my name, written in different sizes and in different, twisted patterns. It was everywhere. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On one of the final pages, the words shifted again, not into my name, but into a message. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there it was, staring back at me in perfect, legible English. You should not have come back. A shiver ran down my spine. I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what was happening, but there was no logical explanation. This was impossible. I looked around the library, half expecting to see someone watching me from the shadows, but I was alone. Or, at least, I thought I was. Suddenly, the room grew darker, the light filtering in through the windows dimming to almost nothing. I could barely make out the rows of shelves around me, and a thick silence hung in the air, pressing down on me like a weight. I felt trapped, like the library itself was alive and it didn't want me to leave. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, and turned toward the door. I needed to get out of there, fast. But as I took my first step, I heard it, a soft, low rustling sound, like the pages of a book being turned. I froze, listening. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable creak of a floorboard. Someone, or something, was moving. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkened room. Nothing. Just rows and rows of books, sitting silently on their shelves. But the sound hadn't stopped. It was getting closer, coming from behind one of the shelves at the far end of the library. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I thought about running. But something, some morbid curiosity or irrational hope that it was all in my head, kept me rooted to the spot. I crept forward, moving slowly between the towering bookshelves, the sound of my heartbeat loud in my ears. As I reached the end of the row, I saw a shadow move. It was brief, just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, but it was enough to send a wave of fear crashing over me. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. Just more silence. The kind that presses in on you, suffocating you. I took another step backward, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the next shelf. At first, it was too dark to make out any details, but as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw it more clearly. It was a person, or at least it looked like a person. They were tall, their form shrouded in a long, dark cloak that seemed to blend into the shadows around them. Their face was hidden, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. I took another step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching. Then, slowly, they lifted a hand and pointed directly at me. My heart leaped into my throat. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. I spun around and bolted for the door, my footsteps echoing in the silent library. The room seemed to stretch before me, the door farther away than it should have been, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, I reached the door and shut it open, stumbling out into the daylight. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street, but the fresh air was a relief. I didn't look back, didn't dare to. I just kept running, my heart pounding, my mind racing with what I had just seen. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment, slamming the door behind me. I locked it, double-checking the deadbolt, and leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking, my whole body trembling from the adrenaline. What the hell had just happened? Who, or what, was that figure in the library? And why was my name in that book? I couldn't make sense of it. My rational mind was grasping at straws, trying to find a logical explanation, but there wasn't one. The library, the book, the figure, it was all real. Too real. I collapsed onto my couch, my heart still racing. For the next few hours, I sat there in silence, replaying the events in my head, trying to convince myself that it was just a bad dream, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. And then, just as I was beginning to calm down, I heard it, a soft, low whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind outside, but as I listened, I realized it was coming from inside my apartment. I stood up, my pulse quickening again. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I followed the sound to the corner of the room where my backpack lay on the floor. I knelt down and unzipped the bag, my hands trembling. Inside, sitting at the bottom of the bag, was the book. The same book I had left behind in the library. I stared at the book in disbelief. It shouldn't have been there. I had left it in the library. I was sure of it. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. The book had followed me, somehow. The whispering continued, soft and indistinct, like multiple voices speaking at once, just beyond the range of understanding. I could feel it, seeping into my thoughts, trying to pull me back into that dark, cursed place. My hands were shaking as I reached for the book, and when my fingers touched its leather cover, that familiar chill ran down my spine. I wanted to throw it out the window, to get rid of it, but I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't matter. Whatever curse the book held, it was already latched onto me. Throwing it away wouldn't change anything. The only way to break the hold it had on me was to understand it, to read it. I knew it was a terrible idea, but there was no escaping it now. I sat down at the kitchen table, the book before me. My apartment felt smaller, the walls seemed to press in, and the air had a strange, oppressive weight to it. I opened the book, and once again, those strange, spiraling symbols filled the pages, only now they didn't shift or move. They seemed more stable, as if waiting for me to continue reading. The first few pages were similar to what I had seen in the library, words and symbols I couldn't understand. But as I turned the pages, the whispers grew louder, clearer. And then, the words changed again. "You have opened the door." My heart skipped a beat. The sentence was clear, written in a bold, jagged script that cut through the symbols like a knife. It didn't feel like a message, it felt like a warning. I flipped to the next page. The symbols continued, but now they were interspersed with more words in English. "There is no turning back." Each phrase sent a shiver down my spine. The whispers swirled in my ears, growing louder with every turn of the page. I didn't want to keep reading, but I couldn't stop. The book had me in its grip now. As I reached the middle of the book, the words became more erratic. The symbols twisted and warped, and the pages seemed to pulse under my fingers. Then, the air in my apartment changed. It felt thick, suffocating, and cold. A chill crept down my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. I looked up from the book, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in the corner of the room, a shadow, darker than the others, shifting in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. The room felt alive, like the walls themselves were watching me. And then I heard it. The whisper, clearer than before. "Read." The voice was low, almost a growl, and it sent a jolt of fear through me. I slammed the book shut, the whispering abruptly stopping. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. I stood up, backing away from the table, my eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the voice. But I was alone. Or at least, I seemed to be. I grabbed the book and shoved it back into my backpack, hoping that hiding it would silence whatever evil it contained. But the moment I zipped up the bag, the air grew colder, and a deep, guttural sound, almost like a distant growl, echoed through the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my keys and rushed out of the apartment. I needed to get out, to breathe fresh air, to escape the oppressive feeling that had taken over my home. I ran down the stairs and out into the street, my mind racing with fear and confusion. But even as I stood outside, the city's noise buzzing around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the book wasn't done with me. It was inside my head, whispering, calling me back. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twisted symbols, those words warning me that I had opened a door that couldn't be closed. And worse, I felt watched, like something had followed me from the library and now lingered in the shadows of my apartment. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and sat up in bed, the weight of the book still pressing on my mind. I needed to do something. I couldn't just let it consume me. There had to be a way to break whatever curse this was. I opened my laptop, the soft glow of the screen lighting up the dark room. I started researching anything I could find on cursed books, ancient symbols, and libraries with dark histories. I didn't expect to find much, but to my surprise, there were threads, rumors, stories. One particular article caught my attention. It mentioned an old library, much like the one I had found, where a similar story had unfolded decades ago. The details were eerily familiar, a mysterious book, symbols that no one could understand, and a curse that plagued the reader until they lost their mind. But there was one part that stood out the most. The article mentioned a ritual, a way to undo the curse. The instructions were vague, but it talked about returning the book to the place where it was found and speaking certain words hidden within the very pages of the cursed text. My stomach tightened. Could it be that simple? Could I end this nightmare by returning the book to the library and performing the ritual? I didn't know, but I was running out of options. I had to try. The next day, I gathered my things and headed back to the old library. The sky was overcast, and the air was thick with humidity, adding to the oppressive feeling that had settled over me. As I approached the library, a sense of dread crept over me. The building loomed in front of me, its windows dark and foreboding, as if it had been waiting for me to return. I pushed open the heavy door, the creak echoing through the empty library. The same musty smell filled the air, and the rows of books seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. I made my way to the far corner of the library, where I had first found the book. The silence was deafening, the only sound the soft thud of my footsteps on the worn wooden floor. When I reached the shelf, I pulled the book from my bag and placed it back where I had found it. For a moment, nothing happened. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for some kind of sign. But the air remained still. And then, the whisper returned. "Speak the words," it said, a voice so close I could almost feel it on my skin. My heart raced as I opened the book to the page where the symbols had twisted into warnings. My eyes scanned the strange writing, searching for something, anything, that looked like the words I needed to say. And then, I saw it. The symbols shifted, aligning themselves into a phrase I could finally understand. "Through the door, you came. Through the door, you must leave." My voice shook as I spoke the words aloud, my breath catching in my throat. The moment the last word left my lips, the air in the library changed. The room seemed to darken, the shadows growing deeper, and a low rumble echoed through the walls. I took a step back, fear gripping me. But then, as quickly as it had started, the rumble stopped. The room was still again, the air lighter, and for the first time since I had found the book, the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me lifted. It was over. I stood in the silence of the library, my heart racing, unsure if the curse was truly broken or if something worse was about to happen. The oppressive atmosphere that had clung to me for days felt lighter now, but not gone. The whispers had ceased, and the strange symbols in the book seemed dormant, like a storm that had finally passed. I turned to leave, and just as I reached the door, a thought struck me. What if it wasn't over? What if the curse wasn't fully lifted, and this was just the beginning of something far darker? I hesitated, my hand on the old, creaky door handle. A part of me wanted to burn the library to the ground, to erase every trace of the cursed books, but I knew that wasn't an option. Instead, I did what any rational person would do. I left. I closed the door behind me and walked out into the cool evening air. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight that had been pressing on my chest lifted, and the dark cloud that had hung over me began to fade. I walked down the empty street, heading home, hopeful that I had finally escaped whatever dark force had attached itself to me. But that hope was short-lived. When I returned to my apartment, everything seemed normal at first. The oppressive air, the cold chill that had haunted my place, was gone. I set my bag down and made my way to the kitchen to pour myself a drink, trying to relax after what felt like a battle with something unseen. As I sat down on the couch, sipping from my glass, my eyes were drawn to the window. It was dusk now, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. Everything seemed so calm, so normal. I allowed myself a moment to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had beaten the curse. And then, the whispers returned. Soft at first, like a distant murmur. I froze, my heart sinking as the sound grew louder. It wasn't coming from inside the apartment this time, it was coming from the street outside. I stood up, cautiously walking to the window, and peered out. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. Standing on the sidewalk, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights, was the figure from the library. Tall, cloaked in darkness, its face hidden in the shadows, but unmistakable. It was watching me. Even though I couldn't see its eyes, I knew it was staring directly at me. I backed away from the window, my pulse quickening. How had it followed me? Hadn't I closed the door, spoken the words? What was happening? The whispers grew louder, filling my ears, echoing in my mind. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to block them out, but they only intensified. They were inside my head now, and I couldn't stop them. You opened the door. The voice was clear now, no longer a whisper, but a guttural, echoing presence. It was everywhere, in the room, in my mind, in my very bones. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through contacts, thinking of who I could call, but no one would understand. No one would believe me. How could I explain that a cursed book from an old library had brought something into my life, something that refused to leave? As I stood there, shaking, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text. I glanced down at the screen, my heart pounding. Unknown number, you can't escape. I dropped the phone, my entire body trembling with fear. The figure outside the window hadn't moved, but it was still there, still watching, still waiting. The realization hit me like a wave, the ritual hadn't worked. Or maybe it had, but the curse wasn't just tied to the book. It was tied to me. I backed away from the window, the whispers still buzzing in my ears. My apartment, which had once been a place of safety, now felt like a prison. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and bolted for the door. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, the whispers faded slightly, but I knew they were still there, lingering at the edges of my mind. The street was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the figure, but it was gone. For now, I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to get away from my apartment, from the library, from everything. My feet carried me through the quiet streets, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I felt like I was walking through a dream, or rather, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I found myself at the edge of town, near the old cemetery. It was a place I hadn't been to in years, but something about it felt right. Like it was calling to me. I didn't question it. I just kept walking, past the iron gates and down the narrow path lined with crumbling gravestones. The whispers were softer now, almost fading into the background. The figure hadn't followed me here, at least not that I could see. But the feeling of being watched still lingered. I made my way to the center of the cemetery, where a large, ancient oak tree stood, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. I stopped beneath the tree, the cold air biting at my skin. For the first time in days, the whispers were silent. I stood there, in the middle of the cemetery, surrounded by the dead, and for a brief moment, I felt at peace. But then, from the shadows, I saw movement. A figure, emerging from behind one of the gravestones. It was the same figure, the one from the library, the one that had followed me home. It stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, its face still hidden in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, but this time I didn't run. I stood my ground, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. If this thing was going to take me, I wasn't going down without a fight. But the figure didn't attack. It stopped a few feet away from me, and for the first time, it spoke. You should never have opened the book. Its voice was low, gravelly, like the sound of stones grinding together. I wanted to speak, to ask it why, but my throat was dry, my words caught in my chest. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying me, and then it raised one hand, pointing toward the library in the distance. You can't run from what's inside. Before I could react, the figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. The cemetery was silent once more, but the weight of its words hung in the air. I knew then that there was no escaping this. The book had opened something, a door that could never be closed. The figure wasn't here to kill me. It was here to remind me, to haunt me, to ensure that I never forgot what I had unleashed. The cold air of the cemetery clung to me as I stood frozen under the ancient oak tree. The figure was gone, but its words echoed in my mind, you can't run from what's inside. I didn't know what it meant exactly, but I understood the core message, this wasn't over. The book, the curse, whatever had been unleashed, it was still with me. It always would be. I walked back to my apartment, my footsteps slow and heavy, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't shake. The night was unnervingly quiet, as if the world around me had slipped into a strange limbo, a place where reality and nightmare bled into one another. Every shadow seemed to hold eyes, every gust of wind whispered my name. When I reached my building, I hesitated at the front door. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The figure, the whispers, the book, they had invaded it, turned it into a place of fear. I wasn't sure if I could handle going back inside. But what choice did I have? I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The stillness of the apartment felt oppressive. The shadows seemed longer, darker, as if they were waiting for something. I closed the door behind me, locking it tight, and stood in the dimly lit hallway, listening. Nothing. Just the soft hum of the city beyond the walls. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the figure in the cemetery, the whispers, the book, maybe it was all just a product of my exhaustion, my fear. But as I walked toward the living room, my heart sank. The book was there. Sitting on the coffee table, where I had left it in the library. My pulse quickened. I had put it back. I knew I had. I had spoken the words, returned it to the shelf. How was it here, in my apartment, waiting for me again? I approached it cautiously, as if it might spring to life at any moment. The leather cover looked the same as before, worn and ancient, with that strange symbol etched into the front. The air around it seemed heavier, as though the book itself carried an unseen weight. I reached out and touched the cover, my fingers trembling. The moment my skin made contact, that familiar chill ran down my spine. I knew what I had to do, though the very thought filled me with dread. I had to read it, to finish whatever had been started. I sat down on the couch, the book heavy in my lap. With a deep breath, I opened it, flipping to the first few pages. The symbols were the same, twisting and spiraling across the paper. But this time, they weren't moving. They were waiting. The first words appeared again. You opened the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned the page. More English words began to form between the symbols. What lies beyond is not meant for your world. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I flipped to the next page. It is too late to close the door. What comes through cannot be stopped. The whispers returned, faint and distant at first, like the sound of a breeze rustling through leaves. But as I read on, they grew louder, closer, filling the room until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating with the sound. My breath quickened as I reached the final pages. The symbols began to shift again, spiraling and warping, but this time they formed something more. A drawing. No, not a drawing, a map. A map of the town. My heart raced as I realized what I was looking at. It was a map of where I lived, with every street and building marked. And there, at the center of the map, was the library. But something else was marked too, something deep beneath the library. A hidden chamber, or perhaps a tunnel. I didn't know, but the message was clear. Return to where it began. I slammed the book shut, my pulse racing. Whatever this curse was, it wasn't just about the book. There was something beneath the library, something that the book had been protecting or containing. And now, because I had opened the door, it was no longer contained. My first instinct was to run, to leave the town and never look back. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. The figure had followed me, the whispers had plagued me. There was no escaping this. I had to finish what had started. I had to go back to the library and face whatever lay beneath it. The next morning, I packed a flashlight, some water, and my phone. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't face it unprepared. The sky was overcast, a thick blanket of gray clouds hanging low, as if the world itself was waiting for something terrible to happen. As I made my way through the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whispers were gone, but the weight of the air remained, heavy and oppressive. I arrived at the library just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. The library stood before me, looming and dark, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the world. I hesitated for a moment, the memories of the figure, the book, and the whispers rushing back to me. But I had no choice. If I wanted to end this, I had to go inside. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the same sound that had greeted me the first time I entered. The familiar smell of old books and dust filled the air, but this time it felt different. The library wasn't just a forgotten building anymore, it was a gateway, a door to something far more dangerous. I made my way through the aisles, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The place was as empty as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down my spine. I reached the far corner of the library, where I had first found the book. The shelves loomed over me, the books silent and still. I glanced at the floor, half expecting to see the trapdoor or hidden entrance that the map had shown me. But there was nothing. For a moment, I considered leaving. What was I doing? I wasn't an adventurer, a hero. I was just a regular person who had gotten in way over his head. But I couldn't leave. Not now. I pulled out my phone and opened the flashlight app, casting the beam of light across the floor. And that's when I saw it, a faint outline, barely visible beneath the dust. It was a square, cut into the wooden floorboards, almost invisible to the naked eye. My heart raced as I knelt down and brushed away the dust. The trapdoor was there, just as the map had shown. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the small iron ring that served as a handle. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to forget about all of this and never come back. But I knew that wasn't an option. With a deep breath, I grabbed the ring and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into darkness. The altar in the center of the room drew me in, its black stone gleaming in the dim light of my flashlight. It was unnaturally smooth, almost as if time itself hadn't touched it. Around its base were more symbols, carved deep into the stone, spiraling in patterns that seemed to twist and shift the longer I looked at them. The air in the chamber was heavy, thick with an unshakable sense of something ancient, something that shouldn't have been disturbed. I approached the altar cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers that had been faint in the tunnel were louder now, though still incomprehensible, swirling around me like the echoes of forgotten voices. As I stood before the altar, I noticed something strange, an object resting on its surface. It was a book. Not just any book, but the book. The same one I have returned to the library, the same one that had haunted me ever since I first touched it. My blood ran cold. How had it gotten here? How could it possibly be waiting for me, once again, in this dark, forgotten place beneath the earth? My hands trembled as I reached for the book, my fingers brushing against the rough, leather cover. The moment I touched it, the whispers stopped. The room fell into a deep, unnatural silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I opened the book slowly, half expecting something to leap out at me from its pages. Instead, there was only one word written on the first page. Stay. My breath caught in my throat. The single word, written in bold, jagged letters, sent a chill down my spine. I flipped through the pages, but every other one was blank. Nothing but that one word, stay. A cold dread crept over me. Was this a warning? A command? Or something else entirely? I didn't know, but I had no intention of staying any longer than I needed to. Whatever was down here, whatever this altar represented, it wasn't meant for me. I could feel it in my bones. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. A sound. Not a whisper this time, but a low, guttural growl that seemed to rumble up from the very stone beneath my feet. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The growl grew louder, more menacing, filling the chamber with a deep, primal fear. I shone my flashlight around the room, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness seemed to press in around me, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then I saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest, moving at the far edge of the chamber. It was massive, larger than any person, its form twisting and writhing in the darkness like smoke. My heart pounded in my chest as the shadow moved closer, its shape becoming more distinct. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew deep down that this was no ordinary creature. This was something far worse, something ancient, something that had been awakened by the curse. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the stone walls, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. My body screamed at me to run, to leave this place and never look back, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, frozen in fear as the shadow loomed closer. It stopped just a few feet away from me, and for the first time, I saw it, or at least, part of it. Glowing eyes, burning like embers in the darkness, staring straight at me. They were filled with malice, with hunger, as if the creature was sizing me up, deciding whether I was worth devouring. And then it spoke. "You should not have come." The voice was low, guttural, almost like a growl, but there was something distinctly human about it. It filled the chamber, echoing off the stone walls, and for a moment I thought the very air around me was vibrating with its power. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my heart racing in my chest. I wanted to speak, to ask what it wanted from me, but the words wouldn't come. The creature watched me, its eyes glowing in the darkness, waiting. "You open the door," it said again, its voice even more menacing this time. "Now, you will suffer." Before I could react, the ground beneath me trembled, and the stone floor cracked. A deep rumble shook the chamber, and I stumbled backward, trying to regain my balance. The growl of the creature filled the air, and in that moment, I knew I had to get out. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to let me leave easily. I turned and bolted toward the tunnel, the sound of the creature's heavy footsteps echoing behind me. The tunnel seemed longer now, stretching out before me as if it were alive, twisting and shifting in the darkness. I could hear the creature's growl growing louder, its presence pressing in on me from behind. I ran faster, my breath ragged, my legs burning as I sprinted up the stone steps, desperate to reach the surface. The whispers had returned, louder now, swirling around me in a chaotic storm of voices. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the noise, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Finally, I burst through the trapdoor, slamming it shut behind me. The library was still, silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. Something had been awakened, something that wouldn't rest until it had what it wanted. As I stood there, gasping for breath, I realized one horrifying truth: the door hadn't been closed. Not really. The creature, whatever it was still down there. And it wasn't going to stop until it found a way out. I stood in the dimly lit library, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The heavy trapdoor beneath me seemed to pulse with the weight of the creature that still lingered below. It hadn't followed me, but I knew deep down that it wasn't trapped forever. The book, the whispers, the shadows, they were all connected to something far more dangerous, something I had only scratched the surface of. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. "It's not over." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Whoever, or whatever, had sent the message knew exactly what was happening. I didn't know if this was some sick game or if the curse had bound me to something far worse than I could imagine, but I was sure of one thing: I couldn't keep running. The air in the library was still, almost too still, and I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The glow on my phone screen flickered, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something, a reflection in the glass. I turned, my flashlight sweeping across the room, but there was nothing there. Just the endless rows of books, silent and waiting. I couldn't stay here. The library had become a prison of sorts, and I had no idea how long it would be until the creature below found its way out. Without a second thought, I shoved my phone into my pocket, grabbed my bag, and rushed out of the building. The moment I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a wave, refreshing and sharp. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again, like the nightmare might be over. But I was wrong. As I walked down the empty street, the city lights flickering in the distance, I felt it again, the weight of something watching me. Every step I took seemed to echo in the silence, the shadows around me shifting and twisting in ways that didn't feel right. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure from before, but there was nothing. Just the cold, quiet night. But then, from somewhere far off, I heard it, the growl. Low, rumbling, and unmistakable. It reverberated through the empty streets, sending a chill down my spine. I froze, my eyes darting around, trying to locate the source of the sound. But the shadows were thick, and the city felt like it had slipped into a different world, one where nightmares were real, and monsters lurked just beyond the edge of the light. I needed to get out of here. I picked up my pace, my footsteps quickening as I hurried toward my apartment. The growl faded behind me, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I reached my building, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door and rushed inside. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I leaned against it, gasping for breath. The silence in my apartment was almost suffocating, the darkness pressing in from every corner. I flicked on the lights, half expecting the creature to be standing there, waiting for me. But there was nothing. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest. Everything felt wrong. My apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a trap. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. And then, as if to confirm my worst fears, the whispers returned. Faint, but growing louder. They weren't coming from the library anymore. They were here, in my home, circling me like vultures waiting to strike. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed the cursed book from my bag and slammed it down on the kitchen table. It had followed me here, haunted me, and now it seemed to be the source of everything. My first instinct was to destroy it, burn it, rip it apart, anything to end this nightmare. But I knew, deep down, that wouldn't work. The curse wasn't just in the book. It was in me now. I opened the book once more, the pages flipping of their own accord, settling on the map of the town. My heart sank as I noticed something new. The library was still marked at the center, but now there was another location, circled in red, my apartment. I staggered back, the air knocked out of me. Whatever force had been unleashed, it was growing stronger, drawing closer to me. My apartment wasn't safe. Nowhere was. But beneath the map, in small, jagged letters, was a single phrase that hadn't been there before. To seal the door, you must offer what it craves. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Offer what it craves? What did that mean? What did this thing want? I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature, the figure, and the whispers were all leading to something ancient and hungry. But I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. It's coming. My heart raced as I read the message, fear gripping me. I glanced at the book, the words offer what it craves burning into my mind. I didn't have much time. Whatever was coming for me, it wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted. I grabbed the book and bolted for the door. I didn't know where I was going, but staying here was no longer an option. The streets were eerily empty, the night air thick with tension as if the city itself knew something was wrong. I found myself running toward the library again, the one place where this all had started. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the familiar musty smell hit me like a wave. I rushed toward the far corner, where the trapdoor lay hidden beneath the floorboards. It was still there, untouched. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the iron ring that would open the door to whatever nightmare waited below. The whispers had grown louder now, almost deafening, urging me forward. With a deep breath, I pulled the door open. I stood at the edge of the open trapdoor, peering down into the inky blackness below. The cold air rising from the tunnel was suffocating, and the whispers, now so loud they felt like a physical force, pressed in on me from all sides. Every fiber of my being told me to turn back, to run as far away from this place as possible, but I couldn't. Not now. I descended the steps slowly, my flashlight flickering as it struggled to cut through the thick darkness. The stone beneath my feet was damp and slick, and the air grew colder the deeper I went. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as if in time with the whispers that seemed to guide me deeper into the unknown. When I reached the bottom, the tunnel stretched out before me, winding into the abyss. It was the same as before, the same oppressive darkness, but this time it felt different. Heavier. As if something far more sinister was waiting for me at the end. I took a deep breath and pressed forward, each step bringing me closer to whatever nightmare waited below. The walls seemed to close in around me, the tunnel twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. The whispers were deafening now, so loud that I could barely think, let alone focus on the path ahead. But then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it, the chamber. It loomed ahead of me, its ancient walls lined with strange symbols that seemed to pulse and writhe in the dim light of my flashlight. The altar was still there, but this time, something else stood in the center of the room. The figure. It was taller now, more distinct, no longer just a shadow but a fully formed being. Its body was cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by a hood, but I could see its glowing eyes, burning like embers in the shadows. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, cold and calculating, as it watched me approach. My heart raced as I stepped into the chamber, the oppressive weight of the air pressing down on me with every breath. I stopped a few feet away from the altar, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figure remained still, silent, but I could feel its presence, overwhelming and suffocating. And then, it spoke. "You have returned," the figure said, its voice low and guttural, echoing through the chamber like a rumble of distant thunder. "You opened the door. You brought this upon yourself." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you want from me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering my question. "To seal the door," it said slowly, "you must offer what it craves." The words from the book flashed in my mind, offer what it craves. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew that the figure wasn't going to tell me outright. Whatever this thing was, it wanted me to figure it out, to understand the price I had to pay. "What does it crave?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it stepped forward, its glowing eyes burning brighter in the darkness. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, filling my mind with thoughts I couldn't control. I backed away, my heart racing, but the figure kept advancing, its presence growing more oppressive with every step. And then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, it said, "You." The realization hit me like a wave. The curse wasn't just about the book or the library, or the whispers. It was about me. I was the one who had opened the door, and now I was the one it craved. My very life was the offering it needed to close the door and seal whatever horror lay on the other side. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. There had to be another way. I couldn't just give myself to this thing. There had to be something else, some other offering, some way to break the curse without sacrificing myself. But before I could act, the ground beneath me trembled, and the chamber shook violently. The stone walls cracked, dust and debris falling from the ceiling as the entire room seemed to shift and collapse. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, as the world crumbled around it. "The door is open," it said, its voice booming over the chaos. "And now, you must close it." I turned and bolted for the tunnel, the ground shaking beneath me as I ran. The walls of the tunnel twisted and writhed as if they were alive, closing in on me as I raced toward the stairs. The whispers were deafening now, screaming in my ears, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I reached the stairs and scrambled up them, my legs burning, my lungs aching for air. The tunnel behind me was collapsing, the roar of stone earth filling the air as the ground gave way. I reached the top and slammed the trapdoor shut, locking the nightmare below. For now, gasping for breath, I stumbled back into the library, the oppressive silence a stark contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. But I knew it wasn't over. The figure's words echoed in my mind, "You must offer what it craves." I had sealed the door for now, but the curse was still alive. The whispers had stopped, but the weight of what I had learned lingered. The price had to be paid. The offering had to be made. As I stood in the empty library, the realization settled over me like a heavy shroud. I was the offering. I stood there, numb with the weight of the truth. The whispers had stopped, the figure was gone, but the air was thick with a sense of inevitability. I was the offering. It wasn't a choice, it was a fact. The only way to close the door for good was to give the curse what it wanted. But I wasn't ready to accept that. There had to be another way. I wasn't about to give up my life for something I barely understood. I couldn't. My mind raced through the possibilities, grasping for some solution, but nothing came. I stared down at the trapdoor, the cold stone beneath my feet grounding me in the reality of the moment. The figure's words echoed in my mind, "You must offer what it craves." It craved me. My life, my soul, whatever essence it needed to complete its ritual. But what if there was a way to outsmart it? I glanced at the cursed book, still lying on the table. The pages had given me pieces of the puzzle, but not the full picture. Maybe there was something I missed, something hidden in the symbols, the words. Something that could help me fight back. With a deep breath, I grabbed the book and flipped through the pages. The symbols twisted and writhed as I turned the paper, but I forced myself to focus. There had to be something here, some clue, some way out. My eyes scanned the lines of cryptic writing, the spirals of ancient text that seemed to blur together. And then I saw it. Near the back of the book, in the faintest ink, there was a phrase. It was so faint that I had almost missed it, but as I held the flashlight over it, the words came into view. The offering can be tricked, but the price will still be paid. My heart skipped a beat. I read the line again, my pulse quickening. What did it mean? Could the curse be manipulated? Was there a way to close the door without sacrificing myself? I didn't know, but this was the only lead I had. If there was even the slightest chance I could outsmart the curse, I had to try. I took a deep breath and closed the book, shoving it into my bag. My mind was racing as I left the library and made my way back to my apartment. The streets were still eerily empty, the shadows long and foreboding, but the oppressive weight of the curse seemed to have lifted, if only slightly. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and set the book down on the table. The apartment was dark, silent, but I could feel the tension in the air. I wasn't alone. Whatever force had followed me, whatever dark entity had been unleashed, it was still here, watching, waiting. I paced around the room, thinking, trying to piece together a plan. If the offering could be tricked, how? What price would still need to be paid? I needed something more, something that could stand in for my life, or at least convince the curse that it had been satisfied. And then it hit me. The book. The cursed object itself. It had started everything, unleashed the chaos. What if the book could be the offering? What if I could trick the curse into thinking that the book itself was the life it craved? I grabbed the book from the table, feeling the weight of it in my hands. The cover was worn and ancient, the symbol on the front glowing faintly in the darkness. It was more than just an object, it was a vessel, a conduit for the curse. And if I could destroy it, maybe I could sever the connection. Maybe that was the offering the curse needed. I wasn't sure, but it was the only plan I had. With a sense of determination, I grabbed my lighter and moved to the fireplace. My hands shook as I knelt down, placing the book in the center of the hearth. The flames crackled as I struck the lighter, the small flame flickering in the dim light of the room. For a moment, I hesitated. Could this really work? Could I really break the curse by destroying the book? But I had no other choice. I lowered the lighter to the edge of the book, the flame catching the dry, ancient pages. The fire spread quickly, the paper curling and blackening as the flames consumed it. The whispers returned, faint at first, then louder, growing into a deafening roar. It was as if the book was screaming, as if the curse itself was fighting back, trying to stop me. But I didn't stop. The fire raged, the book crumbling to ash in the flames, the whispers fading as the last page burned away. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, the tension dissipating as the final remnants of the book were reduced to embers. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. I stood there, staring at the ashes, my heart racing. Had it worked? Had I outsmarted the curse? The air in the apartment felt lighter, the shadows less menacing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The book was gone, but the curse wasn't just in the book. It was in me. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shook, and the walls of the apartment groaned as if under immense pressure. The lights flickered, and the whispers returned, louder and more menacing than before. I stumbled back, my mind racing. What had I done? The curse hadn't been broken. It had been awakened, strengthened. The offering hadn't been enough. The air grew colder, the room spinning around me as the whispers reached a fever pitch. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted and writhed, taking shape, forming into something I couldn't comprehend. And then, I saw it. The figure. It stood in the center of the room, its glowing eyes burning into mine, its presence overwhelming. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was real. Solid. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, the shadows writhed and twisted, forming into grotesque shapes, creatures from nightmares I couldn't even begin to imagine. The figure stepped forward, its voice low and rumbling. "You thought you could escape," it said, its eyes narrowing. "You thought you could trick the curse." I backed away, my heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. The figure didn't respond immediately. It seemed to savor the moment, the fear that radiated from me. And then, with a voice that sent chills down my spine, it spoke. The price must still be paid. Before I could react, the ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling. The apartment, the figure, the whispers, they all disappeared as I plunged into darkness. My heart raced as the world around me twisted and contorted, the cold, suffocating air pressing in on me from all sides. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the fall stopped. I was standing in the chamber again, the altar before me, the air thick with the presence of something ancient and terrible. The figure stood at the altar, its glowing eyes fixed on me. The door remains open, it said, its voice echoing through the chamber. And you will close it. My breath caught in my throat. The figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath me began to crack, the stones splintering and falling away into the abyss. The whispers were deafening now, the air filled with the scent of earth and decay. And then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, the figure said, "The price is your soul." The air in the chamber was thick, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on me, pulling me toward the altar. My legs trembled, my body frozen in place, though every instinct screamed for me to run. But there was no escape now. The figure stood before me, its glowing eyes fixed on me like a predator eyeing its prey. "The price is your soul," it had said. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat dry as I tried to form words. There had to be a way out. There had to be. But the truth, the reality of the situation, settled in like a cold, crushing weight. The book was gone, but it hadn't been enough. I had awakened something far older, far darker than I could ever comprehend. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It seemed to grow larger, more menacing, as the shadows in the chamber swirled around it. "You opened the door," it said, its voice reverberating through the room, shaking the very ground beneath me. "You are bound to it now. Your soul is the key that will seal it forever." I backed away, my mind racing. There had to be something else, something I could offer, something that would take my place. The figure watched me, silent, waiting for me to realize what I already knew. I was the offering. The ground beneath me cracked, and the altar pulsed with a deep, primal energy. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind, drowning out any thoughts of escape. I was trapped. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to fight back the rising panic. But then, as the room seemed to close in on me, I remembered the faint phrase I had read in the book. The offering can be tricked, but the price will still be paid. It was a small glimmer of hope, a chance, however slim, to outsmart the curse. I didn't know what it meant, not fully, but it was all I had. If the offering could be tricked, maybe, just maybe, I could find another way. With shaking hands, I turned toward the altar, my mind racing. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, darker, as if it was preparing to take what it needed. "The price must still be paid," it said again, its voice echoing in my skull. I took a step forward, my legs shaking, barely able to hold me upright. "What if there's another way?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering my words. "There is no other way," it said, its tone cold and final. "The door will remain open until the price is paid." I glanced at the altar, the glowing symbols on its surface pulsating in time with the whispers. My mind raced, searching for any possible solution, any loophole. And then it hit me. The book, the altar, the figure. They were all part of the same curse, the same ritual. What if I could offer something symbolic, something that represented the price without actually giving my soul? It was a long shot, but I had nothing to lose. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It seemed ridiculous, even to me, but the phone had been with me from the beginning. It had been my link to the world above, my connection to reality. Maybe, just maybe, it could serve as the offering. I held the phone out toward the figure, my hands trembling. "Take this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's a part of me. A symbol of my connection to this world." The figure didn't move, didn't react. For a moment, I thought it hadn't worked. But then, slowly, the figure's eyes dimmed, and the ground beneath me stopped shaking. The whispers faded, the oppressive weight in the air lifting slightly. The figure tilted its head, its eyes narrowing as if considering the offering. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought it had worked. But then the figure spoke, its voice filled with dark amusement. "You cannot trick the curse." Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, its hand reaching out to grab me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the chamber closed in, the ground cracking beneath me as the figure's hand wrapped around my wrist. A cold, searing pain shot through my arm as the figure's grip tightened. I cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the whispers, now louder than ever, screaming in my ears. "The price must be paid," the figure said again, its voice low and menacing. "And it will be paid in full." The world around me spun, the chamber collapsing on itself, the whispers deafening. My vision blurred, darkness closing in around me as the figure's grip tightened, pulling me toward the altar. And then, just as the darkness consumed me, I heard it, a voice, faint and distant, but familiar. "Don't give up." The words echoed in my mind, cutting through the chaos. I didn't know where they had come from or who had spoken them, but they gave me the strength I needed to fight back. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I yanked my arm free from the figure's grip and stumbled backward. The chamber shook violently, the ground splitting open as the whispers reached a fever pitch. And then, with a final, desperate push, I threw the phone toward the altar. The phone hit the altar with a crack, the screen shattering as it landed. For a moment, everything went still. The whispers stopped, the ground stopped shaking, and the figure froze in place, its glowing eyes flickering. And then, with a sound like the tearing of reality itself, the altar split in two. The ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling, plummeting into the abyss below. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the figure, its eyes glowing brighter than ever as it reached out one final time. And then, there was nothing. I plunged into the darkness, the world spinning around me as the air whipped past my face. There was no up, no down, just the cold, suffocating void that seemed to swallow me whole. My heart pounded in my chest, and the whispers, though distant now, echoed in my ears like a haunting lullaby. I had no sense of how long I was falling, seconds, minutes. Time felt distorted, stretched, as if I was slipping through the cracks of reality itself. My mind raced, trying to grasp onto anything solid, anything real. But there was nothing. Only the emptiness. And then, with a jarring, bone-shaking impact, I hit the ground. The pain shot through my body like a bolt of lightning, my breath knocked out of me. I lay there, gasping, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The whispers were gone, the oppressive weight in the air lifted. The world around me was still, silent. Slowly, I opened my eyes, blinking against the dim light. I wasn't in the chamber anymore. I was outside. The cold night air hit me like a wave, the sound of wind rustling through the trees reaching my ears. I was lying on the damp grass, the stars twinkling above me in the vast, endless sky. I sat up slowly, wincing as my muscles protested. My mind was still reeling from the fall, from everything that had happened. The figure, the curse, the offering, had it all been real? Or was it some twisted nightmare I had just escaped from? But as I looked around, I realized something. The library was gone. The altar, the underground chamber, none of it was here. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by trees, with no sign of where I had come from. My phone was gone too, lost in the darkness. I had thrown it toward the altar, hoping, praying that it would be enough. But now, as I sat there, alone in the night, I couldn't help but wonder if the curse had truly been lifted, or if it was just waiting. I stood up, my legs shaky, and began to walk. I didn't know where I was going. There was no path, no road, just the open field stretching out before me. But something pulled me forward, a faint sense of direction that I couldn't explain. As I walked, the events of the night played over and over in my mind. The whispers, the figure, the price. I had tried to trick the curse, to outsmart it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The price hadn't been paid. Not fully. The offering was still incomplete. Suddenly, the wind picked up, and the temperature dropped sharply. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me as I glanced over my shoulder. The night seemed darker now, the stars fading, the trees twisting in the wind like shadows. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl. My heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable, the same growl I had heard in the chamber, the same presence that had haunted me from the moment I opened that cursed book. It was still here. It had followed me. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the growl grew louder. The wind howled through the trees, the shadows closing in around me, and I knew, without a doubt, that the figure wasn't done with me. The offering had to be paid, and it was coming to collect. I broke into a run, my feet pounding against the soft earth as I raced through the darkness. The growl followed me, growing louder, more menacing with every step. I could feel it, just behind me, its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. And then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a light. Faint, but unmistakable, flickering in the distance. It was a house, standing alone at the edge of the field, its windows glowing with a soft, warm light. My heart leapt in my chest. It was a chance. A chance to escape, to find safety, to outrun whatever was chasing me. I sprinted toward the house, the growl echoing in my ears, the darkness closing in. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The light grew closer, brighter, until finally, I reached the door. I pounded on it, my fist slamming against the wood, my voice hoarse as I shouted for help. Please, let me in. It's coming. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of the wind and the low, rumbling growl behind me. And then, slowly, the door creaked open. An old woman stood in the doorway, her face lined with age, her eyes deep and knowing. She didn't say a word, just stepped aside, allowing me to stumble inside. The warmth of the house enveloped me like a blanket, the flickering fire and the heart casting long shadows across the room. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The old woman closed the door behind me, the growl fading into the distance as if it had been cut off. For the first time in what felt like hours, the silence was comforting. But as I lay there, trying to catch my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The old woman watched me from across the room, her expression calm, almost serene. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she spoke. "You can't run from it, you know." My heart skipped a beat. I sat up slowly, my eyes locking onto hers. What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved to the fireplace, stirring the flames with an old iron poker. The fire crackled, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. "You've opened the door," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "And now, you must close it." My blood ran cold. The words were almost identical to what the figure had said. I tried, I stammered. "I destroyed the book. The old woman shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "The book was never the key," she said softly. "The offering is still incomplete." I stared at her, my mind racing. "But what does it want? What do I have to do?" She turned to face me, her expression calm but serious. "The offering," she said, "is you." My breath caught in my throat. The realization hit me like a wave. The curse hadn't been outsmarted. The price hadn't been paid. And now, there was no escaping it. Before I could respond, the growl returned, louder, closer than ever. The walls of the house shook, the fire flickering wildly as the shadows twisted and writhed. The old woman stepped back, her face calm as the door behind me creaked open. And there, standing in the doorway, was the figure. Its glowing eyes burned into mine, its presence filling the room, suffocating me with its power. The whispers returned, swirling around me like a storm, and I knew, without a doubt, that the end had come. The price would be paid. My soul was the offering. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.